Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So we're here to talk about getting the message across. I'm Lewis Jamieson. I'm one of the founders of Music Declares Emergency. For those of you who don't know Music Declares Emergency, we were formed and launched in 2019 with the primary objective of using music to engage the industry, artists and music fans, most crucially, with the climate emergency. Our founding premise was that music could be an incredibly powerful tool in encouraging people to think about being part of the conversation around the climate emergency. We felt, and the evidence suggested at the time, that many people felt excluded from the conversation for various reasons. And we have a nerving and endless belief in music as something that can encourage people to think positively about social change. And we have worked for the last 4.5 years on that basis. So I'd like to ask my panelists to introduce themselves one at a time before we get talking. We have some comms experts here, so hopefully something useful will come out of this talk for you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Cox. I run a sustainable impact agency called Betternotstop. We do lots of work with impact strategies at music festivals. We also help businesses get their B Corp certification and do carbon literacy training. I also have a separate business called the Better Business Network, which is a membership organisation for businesses of all sectors and industries to get involved in the climate emergency and having a positive impact on the planet. We're doing lots of things with that as well. And I run something called the Better Business Summit, which is every January in Manchester. But you can find all of that on LinkedIn. I'm just going to talk about one thing today, I think.
Okay, thank you, Hannah.
And I'm Betsy Reed. I've worked in what's now called sustainability for almost 20 years, but sort of surfed across various sectors. My career is entirely British, in spite of the accent. But I've run the National Fair Trade Organisation in Scotland. I was the head of campaigns at Zero Waste Scotland, so created the National Recycling Campaign there, ran the National Food Waste Campaign. But for the past 10 years, I've worked as a freelance consultant. I also got briefly headhunted to work in-house running the public affairs for Nestle. That was an interesting year of my life. But I also work mainly with consultancies, communications agencies, and I lead as the head tutor a course for the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership on communicating for influence and impact. So I teach executives how to storytell, how to be better leaders using communications, and I think that's particularly relevant to what we'll talk about today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Frances Fox. I'm the founder and UK director of Climate Live, as well as being a student at UEA. So Climate Live has teams in over 40 countries, and we organize concerts and go to festivals to engage a new audience in the movement. And I got involved with that after being involved with the youth climate strikes that Greta started and being a kind of driving force in them in the UK and internationally, and realizing that there are a lot of young people who aren't engaged in the movement, but we're like talking about lineups for big festivals and which artists are coming to town. So my kind of vision is bringing the people who are excited about music into being excited about the planet.
Thank you all. So I'd like to start with quite a simple opener. One of the founding principles of Music Declares was, in our declaration, we said that we demanded that media tell the truth, which was very kind of strident of us, but had a serious point. It feels to me like the media now does tell the truth by and large, that news coverage of the climate emergency is widespread and mainstream. Do you feel that our job is to tell the truth, or do you feel that our job is to tell a story?
I want this one. All right. I think the answer is yes to both. I think you can tell the truth elegantly in a way that gives people what they crave, which is the truth, while also taking them on a journey to how they can co-create a better future. Because if you think about myths and storytelling throughout cultures, throughout history, it's about creating a shared narrative that then creates emotional connection and a sense of, well, think the Blitz mentality, the stiff upper lip, and we got through this together. We get through hard things together, and it's generally through a good story.
Okay, and in the context of what we're here today for, in terms of live events, how do you think that a live event helps to frame that kind of approach of storytelling?
Me again? All right, good.
Whoever wants it.
All right, there's a bit of interesting research that came out in 2020 through National Public Radio in the United States, talking about how our brainwaves actually sync with the brainwaves of the person telling us a story. And the more emotionally involved we are, the more our brainwaves are in sync. But this is because it's part of the brain that creates emotional response and processes emotion around sounds, which sounds amazingly like music festivals and speeches and the things that we go to be inspired. So I think there's actually kind of an interesting neuroscientific aspect there, but it's like you create events that people want to go to be inspired, to have an experience, to connect with others. And that literally helps us to connect to parts of our brain that we need to create solutions through good stories. So how do you create the narrative of an event in how you market it, in how you put it on, and who you have there as part of the program? And then how do you follow it up to keep that momentum going and maybe even build a movement?
I mean, Francis, you have the very famous Climate Live bus. So part of what Climate Live does, of my understanding anyway, at events, is it creates a space as well as to tell the story. Do you want to explain a little more of how you arrive and behave on site?
Absolutely. So if you haven't seen, Climate Live has an open-top double-decker bus, which is solar-powered, and we use it at a stage and take it to festivals in the UK, where we have talks from youth climate and social justice activists interspersed with performances from up-and-coming local artists. And the idea is to go where the people are. So we go to the big festivals like Reading and Leeds, for example, and engage with young people who are already there. And our target audience are people that wouldn't have gone to a protest, but they'd see a big pink bus and be like, oh, what's that? Let's go over and hear some music and be like, that sounds all right, we'll go over. And then next to it, we have our campaign stall with youth climate activists who can talk to festival goers about how to get involved. And we take a coalition of the main youth climate groups in the UK with us, so people can kind of be directed to whichever is their like area of interest, whether that's education or air quality, etc. So that, yeah, that's proven quite effective, especially as we are the same age as the people we're engaging with. So our team, like our core team at the moment is age 16 to 23. So we're the same kind of age as the people going to all these festivals. So we're not like intimidating or preachy. We're just talking to them like, hey, this is what we're doing. You can get involved. And yeah, it's proven quite effective. A lot of the people on our team this year at festivals met us last year at a festival just as a punter.
Okay. And so, Hannah, you work with Jodrell Bank, I think I'm right in saying, Blue Dot, is that correct?
Yeah, Blue Dot and Kendall Calling.
So I think you were telling me about Blue Dot and language and trying to link the science and the narrative. Do you want to tell us a little more about that? Because I found that fascinating.
Yeah, I think it depends on the event of what story you're talking to the audience about. So I'll use Kendall and Blue Dot as just two examples of different approaches we take as an organisation. Kendall's an audience which historically they were having around 6,000 tents left at the end of each festival, of an audience of about 30,000, now 40,000 people going to that event, which was a huge waste issue. So we did a big campaign with Kendall called the Leave Nothing But Memories campaign. There was a lot more around that campaign than just take your tent home. But there was a lot around audience behaviour. Why are they leaving their tent? What's the narrative? What's the thoughts going through their head? And how can we change that thought process with the audience? So the stories we're having at Kendall with the audience when it comes to sustainability and impact is a lot around consumerism, waste, being conscious of what you're buying, what you're using, what you're taking away. Blue Dot Festival is a very different festival. It's based at Jodrell Bank Space Observatory in Cheshire. The audience is older. You'd be lucky to see one tent left there at the end of the festival. So if that's all my company did was sort out the tent situation, they don't have that problem. But what Blue Dot, the way we approach things with Blue Dot was looking at, has anyone here, just as a show of hands, heard the term regenerative business practices? Okay, so it's basically, if you don't know that word, now I'm sharing it with you so you can feel like you know, all about this like secret thing we're talking about, but it's basically about sustainability is about kind of keeping the balance. Regenerative is actually giving back more as a business or an organization or as a person to the world that we live in. So at Blue Dot, we're looking at like how can we be regenerative, and a lot of that is storytelling to the audience. There's lots of climate scientists talking at Blue Dot. People in that audience actually want to take action on kind of bigger things, like how do we speak to the government? What can I do at home? What can I do in my local area? So having those stories with the audience is completely different, because I think if we had a climate scientist come on stage at Kendall, I don't know if they would even get a reaction, or even they'd be able to connect with the audience because they're at a different part in their story. So it's kind of understanding at whatever event we're running, what stage of our audience at, and how can we kind of push them a little bit further along the road so they start to become more interested in these further conversations that we need to be having quite quickly.
I mean, I find that interesting. I'm thinking about the Ziggett Festival this year, which I think you were at, weren't you, Francis? Because Billie Eilish was headlining and the promoters were very engaged with what she was saying. They gave space on the main stage to Climate Live activists to speak, as well as space within the festival to host something. How did that work? Did having that artist endorsement make the audience more engaged with the message?
Definitely, yeah. So I couldn't make it in the end. I was at Boomtown. But Domi Palmer and Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, from the Climate Live team, were amazingly given a slot to speak right before Billie went on at Ziggett. And it was great. All her fans gathered early to see her play, and they were cheering on the speeches and getting really involved. It's just something that doesn't really happen very often. Youth activists being given the platform to speak at 7 p.m. at a major festival on the main stage, and it worked really well. Everyone was really engaged. We got some new sign-ups for the team. Yeah.
So one of the questions I was going to ask all three of you was the question of audience, in terms of how do you tailor the message to audience? So that's a great example of somebody facilitating engagement for you. I wonder if there's any other examples that you can draw from your work about how you change the same message in terms of wording or language for different audiences.
So I run the Better Business Summit, so clues in the name. I'm absolutely terrible with names. I used to run a club night called Monday Club. Guess what night that was on? I'm really bad with names. So it's basically an event for purpose-driven businesses to come together and all kind of share knowledge and collaborate and all that kind of stuff. And at that event, we push more radical conversations that probably we wouldn't be able to do at other business conferences, similar to how Chris and Bethan and the team are doing here at Vision 2025. We had actually one of our biggest panels, which we had to close the door for, was a round table around we need to sack whoever's doing the climate crisis PR, because it's not working, that narrative, to some people. For some people, they really see that as a call to arms, as an action. For me, when I hear emergency, I'm like, how can I help? For other people, through data and research I'm happy to share with anyone, people are thinking, it's not my responsibility, it doesn't matter if I make a difference, the government and the big businesses are the ones that need to make a difference. And there's a kind of a lack of empowerment in their feeling of what they can do to make a difference. So for us, even starting to have the conversation at Kendall with the audience after 2 years, we went from having a conversation about waste in the tent and littering, and then this year we were talking about circular economy, talking about the cup system, and we were working with our food traders around food waste, so we can kind of build on the conversation. But I think, as Kathy was saying in her speech earlier, we're talking about 7 years here. It's not just about talking to people in the polite way that they feel comfortable as talking to them. It's kind of our responsibility as citizens of the earth to kind of push people a little bit into those uncomfortable areas so that they start asking themselves, why am I not involved in this? This is just as important to me, and I am just as important to be involved in this conversation too.
I'm going to give a very personal anecdote that I don't And they don't want to be told they're environmentalists, and they don't want you to tell them to be an environmentalist. But if you put it in the terms of you're taking responsibility for yourselves, you're taking responsibility for people around you, so the government won't tell you what to do. They're also raging cowboys from Wyoming. But that works for them. And so that prepared me for this career in behavior change, where I was thinking, how do I get people in a high-rise in Glasgow to want to recycle when they have other issues on their plate that are far more pressing to them? And the answer is you really have to climb off your moral high ground, I'll say that to be challenging, and not put it the way you want to put it, and not have people have to do it for the reasons you want them to do it. Figure out why they want to do the thing that you're trying to get them to do, and then just hand it to them on a plate in a way that makes them feel good, that creates an emotional bond for them, that makes them more part of their community they want to be part of. You know, they don't have to sign up to being a climate activist if they don't want to be. It just makes them a better community member, or maybe they're thinking local. Find the message that's in it for them, find the feel-good factor that's in it for them, and it might work.
Interesting. I'm going to just put a little bit of myself into this, if I may. I'm from Blackpool in the north of England, and when I go home and see the people I grew up with, there's a tradition of ribbing where I come from. So apart from being called London boy, even though I was born there, so there's half an hour of that, and then there's half an hour of me being asked how my bongo-playing, dreadlock-wielding, climate-y friends are getting on down in that London. But once we've got through all that, there's a lot of rivers around there, a lot of fishing, it's on the coast, and they are concerned. They're concerned about the state of the rivers, they're concerned about fish stocks, they're concerned about Ineos's fracking attempt down the road, which the local community shut down. But you're absolutely right. If you called them environmentalists, they'd run a mile. But actually, their actions are environmentalists. So I suppose what's interesting here, we all deal with this in different ways. Are there examples? Obviously, you've just given one. But yourself, Hannah and Francis, do you have examples where you've consciously avoided certain terminologies in order to get your message across? Putting you on the spot, obviously.
Yeah, all the time. I do it all the time. I work with, in festivals, you know, you work with so many different stakeholders within that organisation. You work with waste, suppliers, artist liaison, partnerships, operations, logistics. You know, it's about understanding for them, going back to what you said, about like where can they see the benefit in the I call it like co-benefits of them kind of doing the climate work, but also, you know, making a change and improvement in what they're doing. I feel like I work with businesses as well. So with a lot of businesses, you're talking about a commercial thing that is built to make money and to make a profit. And we need to try and change this narrative to businesses that see sustainability as a cost within the organisation. I mean, the whole meaning of sustainability is to sustain life on Earth. And if you don't think sustaining life on Earth is important for you or your business, you are completely crazy. So for us, I see a lot of the sustainability costs for businesses are spending money in advance to avoid losing money in the future. And kind of future-proofing their business. So having that, so often I'll be having conversations with businesses, and there's no point mentioning the climate emergency. There's no point me talking about nature in the boardroom or some of the more, I don't think particularly radical ideas, but some of the things we do as an organisation, pushing for government policy to change. But to say to a business, this will give you a competitive advantage, this will make your audience want to be more loyal to you, want to continue to spend money with you. Person sees that will reduce a waste cost at the festival, or the catering company will see that they'll get a better profit margin by offering kind of veggie or vegan meals. It's about, going back to what Betsy said, just talking to them, recognising what that person's challenge is and how our work can co-benefit that.
I mean, with Climate Live, Francis, I wonder, because it's defined by age to a degree, I think that's fair to say, yeah. Do you feel a pressure to be more radical because you're the young people and it's your future? Does the way that others perceive you affect how you behave, or do you feel clear and clean in the way you go about it?
Definitely, we think about how we're perceived as Climate Live, as the kind of link between the youth climate movement and the music industry and events, because we want to engage different people than other youth climate groups engage, essentially. So we aren't going out being like, for example, on our bus, it doesn't say like, end fossil fuels, we're in a climate emergency. It's pink, and it says, can you hear us yet? Which is quite novel. And speaking to individual people when they come up to our stall, for example, we cater what we say to different people, kind of meet them where they're at, ask like, have you thought much about the climate before? And if they say yes, we'll be like, well, have you heard of these groups that you could support? And then we direct them to different youth climate groups. Or someone might be a bit like not really interested, but they've come to chat with us because we have bio-glitter or no music on a dead planet tattoos. But they might be in a band, and we'll be like, well, do you want to play this major festival? You can apply to play on our bus, and then that gets them involved in thinking about it. So we definitely tailor how we talk to different people and try and paint ourselves as not just youth climate activists, like we're in music as well. And definitely the perception of youth has, our perception as young people has led to us being, I guess you could say it's quite radical that a few years ago none of us had any experience in the music industry, and now we're running a stage. We just kind of went right on in there, thanks to the wonderful help of some people in this room.
So the question there then about audiences, from myself to you. What do you think, could you illustrate one piece of work you've done that you think has been the most effective, and possibly a little bit on why you feel that's been the most effective piece of work?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I think having our video playing on screens at festivals has been really effective, because it's such a simple thing to organize. It doesn't take much legwork, and then it's playing in every changeover and people can see it. And I watched it playing at, I think it was Leeds this year, and the audience were like cheering as their favorite artist or like actor came on screen. So it was really like engaging with them, and I guess that just goes to show the power of artists using their voice and putting their voice to the cause.
Well, we certainly know about the power of artists as well. Thank you, Billy. Again, every year we say that. Betsy, can you pick a favourite? Illustrate how this works for our audience?
Well, when I ran the Scottish Fair Trade Forum for Fair Trade Fortnight every year, I would drag a fair trade producer around Scotland for 2 weeks, meeting local councils, university leaders, everybody. And nobody ever forgot their connection with that person and the story that they heard about how what they choose as their coffee, whether or not they look at the label in their clothes and see where it was made, etc., really does have an impact on these people's communities. And they would say, thank you so much for buying fairly traded products. This is what has happened in my community. There are children who can go to school. There, just hearing that, people never forget it. And then when they are faced with the choice at the supermarket, for example, shall I buy the cheaper one or shall I buy the fair trade one? That story sticks with them. And they just think, what's a few more pence, even a pound, whatever, for the product that actually does something for that person I met? So for that, I'm really proud of that, because Scotland became the world's second fair trade nation. All of the local authorities are involved, the majority of universities, the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish government. And I think it was that, meeting the person, hearing the story from the actual farming communities, for example, in places like Kenya or Malawi or Palestine, it changed their lives. And I'm quite proud of that.
And the power of that is it just normalizes it. As something we're very focused on at Music Declares is trying to make this normal. We don't want it to be exceptional that people talk about the climate or the climate emergency or the solutions. We just want it to be normal. Like we talk about the traffic or the weather, he says, looking outside. Would you like to join in the things I've loved?
Yeah, so a bit outside festival stuff. I feel I talk about Kensal calling at these panels, events all the time, but I'm involved in a campaign called the Better Business Act. I love doing a show of hands, just to see if anyone's listening to me when I talk. Yeah, okay, 2, great. 3, 4, okay, fantastic. The Better Business Act is a campaign to change company law in the UK. So at the moment, when you start a limited company and you kind of register on Companies House for 13 quid, you immediately have to stick to company law, and company law says that your business has to work in the interest of the shareholders. So the point of that company is to make money for the people that own the company. And we are campaigning for a change in the law so that whenever a limited company is started in the UK, they have to work in the interest of the stakeholders, and a stakeholder is anyone that is affected by that company's actions. So that campaign wasn't started by me, it was started by B-Lab UK. A guy called Chris Turner is heading it up if anyone's interested in that, and any business can sign up to the Better Business Act as a supporter. If you really want to be a supporter, you can make a change. Actually, you can write to Companies House and say, I want my business to work in the interest of its stakeholders, not just its shareholders. If a business is a B Corp, it will have done that as part of its B Corp process, but you can do that as a business. And it's starting to take in a bit of that legal accountability for businesses to look after its stakeholders. And the first year I got involved in that, we mass lobbied Parliament. We all went down to the House of Commons and had about 300 business owners went in. And I didn't know this, but you can, at any point of the day, walk into the House of Commons and demand to see your MP. So if you're ever in that part of London, you actually can walk in, and if they're like, what are you doing here? You're like, I'm here to see my MP. They have to let you in, and you go like into this lobby in the middle with and you sign a little bit of paper. And a guy came down, not my MP, but his assistant, who was like, no one's ever done this before. What are you doing here? And I was like, well, I didn't know I could till like a week ago. And 300 business owners did that to make a point. We all care about this law being changed. And then this year, we all were invited to Westminster Palace, and Mary Portas did an incredibly rousing speech. She's one of the ambassadors to the programme. And I thought, 2 years ago, Hannah, when I started my business in my spare room during COVID, because I'd had to furlough my company and I was working in a pub serving curly fries to people as a vegan chef. And now I'm stood in Westminster Palace, and it's got a gift shop. Yeah, I bought a lot there, so yeah, it was good.
The beauty of that, as an action, I'm tempted to do that now, just get loads of people down to Parliament to demand to see their MP all at the same time, is you can measure it. And that's a terrible segue, but I am interested in this, and we're running out of time. One of the things we struggle with is trying to prove that what we do works. Music declares. So what happens is somebody will come up to us from the music industry. They go, oh, I love what you do. It's great. Oh, it's so cool. And we go, oh, thanks very much. Would you like to fund us? They go, oh, well, we need to know it works. And we go, but you just told me it works. And they go, no, but properly know it works. And we kind of understand what they mean, because they mean KPIs and pie charts and graphs and things like that. And it's very difficult to do with what we do. Is that something that we all share when we're trying to change minds and change opinions? Or have any of you found clever ways of actually proving it works that I can steal?
No, go.
I think we're on the same page, as we've been doing some colluding on this topic. But something that we've done for Climate Live so far is socials tracking. So like things like how many people does this Instagram post reach, and we like keep track of that, and we ask people to follow our Instagram when they come to our stores, so we can see like how many more people are following that. But yeah, it's really hard because stuff like email lists is hard to get folk to sign up to at a festival, which obviously would be the ideal thing. But you guys have found a good way to do that with Fan Club for Climate, with the incentive of like winning tickets and stuff.
So very, very briefly, we started a thing called Fan Club for Climate. The idea is that we recruit music fans generally on site at festivals, but through every channel we can think of coming into the new year, to be part of Music Declares. It's essentially the fan arm of Music Declares, and then we give them a monthly challenge or something every month to interact with us, and the ultimate ambition is to have real in-life groups across the country, which will be measurable. But I am interested in just in a general comms sense, because I've worked in comms a long time. Measuring comms is really tricky, but comms is vital. Everyone says now we haven't got a climate crisis, we've got a comms crisis, and I'm very much on that page. So how we measure this and how we prove it, and we prove it's working, and therefore find the support and funding from the people we need, is really important. Can I pass that on to you, Betsy?
I love this question because, again, it's something I could dork out on forever. Because it's behavior that you want to measure, right? You want to measure behavior change. You want to measure what's happened as a result. Fortunately, I was housed with a lot of international NGOs early in my career, like Oxfam and the biggies, who are good at measuring prevention. And, you know, if you do an intervention in the humanitarian sector, how do you measure how many people didn't die? So they're really skilled at this. And then working at Zero Waste Scotland taught me a lot about behavior change, because I had to be able to give this to my minister in Parliament so he could approve my budget. But it's actually, it's not simple, but it's not as hard as people think. You can do so much with things like even just Google surveys. Benchmarking is your best friend. Think of that word. Like, how can you measure something at the start of a project? What do people know? What are people doing? And then if you can create even just little pilot groups from your email list and measure them periodically, you can start to demonstrate changes in awareness, changes in behavior or activity, and funders that you can use to demonstrate your impact, because that also creates such momentum. I think it's one of the fundamental things we all as storytellers and people who communicate need to commit to, because I don't think we have a communications problem. I think we have a measurement problem, and that's not insurmountable. So, and also, I should probably say, I do consultancy in the event sector for The Bulb. Some of you might have heard of The Bulb. And this is one of the things we're thinking about offering. So if that's of interest to you, let me know, because we would love to work with you on measuring impact, because measuring impact of communications, measuring behavior change in particular. You're very good at things like carbon, probably, and reducing plastics, but we can help you with behavior change.
The advocacy for communication. So people domain, there's a lot of missed opportunity. So the final question I'd like us all to think about is, what do we think we're missing from those partners or potential partners that we work with in terms of telling their stories better, to allow us to tell our stories better, to allow us to engage with more people?
Over to you.
Anyone? I'm happy to kick it off.
You kick it off.
Okay, so I would like organisations to think about comms at the start of their planning, not 6 months into it, 3 months before the event, and then confirm it 6 weeks before the event. Because whilst we can still do work in that frame, we can do better work if we're in the conversation from the very beginning.
Oh, can I build straight onto that? Because I was doing a communications workshop right before I came to this. I was giving one. And it's also build in, how are you going to measure it super early, because then you'll create your communications around what is measurable. So that's a useful thing to build into. Comms early and measurement early in the process.
To add on to that, in terms of including the climate stuff from the start, something that Climate Live has started to do at Festival Republic events this year is actually having our stage times on the app and doing joint posts with the festivals. So rather than just having climate stuff at the event when people get there, communicating it before so that more people actually show up to what's happening.
Would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're all agreeing it's getting that pre-comms with every single department beforehand, but also I think it's for festivals or event companies, like there's two things that really annoy me. One is when somebody who has no sustainability experience is given that job within their existing role at the festival. I think it puts a lot of pressure on with that person. So I think it's feeling that it can just be an add-on to a role. It really needs to be taken kind of seriously to give that person within the organisation the time, the education, the support and the training if they're going to have that added into their existing role. And also for the sustainability managers or directors of larger organisations to be having, and I've never worked in a large event organisation, but to be involved in early conversations when it comes to things like partnerships and operations and logistics. We were talking about it in our round table earlier. Often you'll be in a position, as you've said, where it's almost like too late to make the change and you're trying to put a bandage onto something, whereas if those conversations had happened earlier, you'd be in a better position as an event. So I think this idea that sustainability is a pillar or a part of the event journey as opposed to a foundational part that every single department needs to understand how it affects them and have education in how it affects them is really important. I know that there's a carbon literacy for the music industries. James from Climate EQ runs it. Is something anybody in this room could do. We run carbon literacy training as well, but his is much more focused on the industry and the sector. Something like that training, just so everyone in that leadership team understands why they're being asked to make the changes, makes it easier for the changes to happen. Often when someone's being asked to make changes and they don't understand why it's relevant or why it's important, and it just feels like an extra job, that's when that change isn't going to happen.
So that would suggest that what we're saying is that there needs to be a piece of communications work within the businesses about why it's important before we do the piece of work with the business to the audience about why it's important and it's vital. I'd like to open it up to questions, if I may. Anybody got a question?
Hi, my name is Michelle Miles. I'm the director of the Sustainable Wedding Alliance. I've also been working in the industry for 20 years and used to run festivals myself, so have a good background. Do you think that it is important for any event organisation to actually develop an eligibility criteria for the partners that they're working with, but also the suppliers and the traders that they're bringing on? Because quite often we see an organisation putting out fantastic things, saying fantastic things and encouraging the attendees to do the right thing. But then you'll walk down the traders' route and see them not looking after their waste and actually doing things that contradict quite a lot of the messaging of the event and the festival.
Anyone want to take that?
I think we're both dying for that one. Yes, because I use the word risk and reputation quite often, and it's just, they're good conversation starters, because if you're saying you're doing something and you're not down your supply chain, you're creating risk for yourself. So absolutely, I think that's super important. And a lot of good agencies, good companies who run events are having, increasingly, they're doing engagement with their suppliers, and a rising tide lifts all boats. So if you want there to be a more sustainable supply chain, you have to create it yourself. And a lot of people just need help and support and education and the motivation that you'll award them a contract, you'll give them work if they do it.
In the public sector space, they're now measuring whether you've got sustainability credentials within your organisation as part of that point system. Something that's really effective to do is just ask your existing suppliers and supply chain the question: are you paying real living wage? Are you real living wage accredited? What are your sustainability policies? Even just as a sense check, because if we all start asking those questions to people, if every single time I went for a job or a client came to my business and said, are you real living wage accredited? I think I probably should do that, because that will probably win me this business. So even just asking the questions is a really powerful step, because if everyone starts asking the same question, are you B Corp? Have you got a sustainability policy? Are you accredited? Is important. So I think it's asking the questions and then also asking them to provide that as part of their contract pre-event as well. Lots of events also do, we were talking at the round table of holding back final 30% payment unless you get the sustainability data of somebody. I know a lot of festivals I work at do a litter bond, so if their pitch isn't left tidy or they haven't been using the waste management properly, there's a cost to them as well. So it's again going back to what's going to make them do it. Some people aren't just going to do it because it's the right thing to do. If there's a financial incentive to it, that might be the thing you're having a conversation about.
Yeah, hopefully. Any other questions? absolutely.
Hi, I'm Stefan. I work for Bristol City Council events team, working on Harbourfest in Bristol. Do you think there's a bit of a challenge sometimes with comms? And I'm thinking, for example, if you have a limited number of times you can hit your mailing list before they'll unsubscribe, or if you've got 30 seconds on BBC News, is it easier to talk about your 3 headliners than get a sustainability message across? And how do you kind of combat that story is maybe a little bit more nuanced and hard to get across quickly?
So how do you use a very short window to have the most effective communication?
Yeah.
Sounds like your world.
Get an artist to say it instead. Like we did a gig a few years ago with Declan McKenna, and instead of having a youth activist on the news, we had him doing the interview, and it got a lot more engagement than just one of us who no one knows saying it. Yeah,
I mean, I'd second that. It's easy to decry the idea of using celebrity to gain attention, but the simple fact is celebrity does gain attention. That's why people do it. I think the thing I'd add to that is how you frame the message. So we were very conscious when we created the message, No Music on a Dead Planet. It was very deliberate. We wanted something that artists could use and get behind that wasn't so specific that it got them bogged down in a conversation about nuance and subtlety. So it was a door opener, essentially. I think in your 30-second thing, what's incumbent upon the organisation using the 30 seconds is to find ways to put context and meaning into that 30 seconds. So you don't just have the moment and then it disappears. You have the moment and then you utilise the moment to get the meaning in there. So it's an endless, constant, growing kind of communications thing you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I, again, disagree with me. This is literally just my opinion. It is not a fact. I'm just really tired of seeing green teams and eco stuff at festivals. I feel like it turns off the audience that they're trying to connect with, because the audience that they're connecting with are already on that journey. So it's how do we connect with them differently? At Kendal, the Leave Nothing But Memories campaign is very much based around the fact that the event is at a deer park, and there wasn't really much conversation around the fact it was at a deer park in previous years. People knew it was at Lowther Park, it's been there for years, but that connection between understanding this is where animals live, 11 months of the year when we're not building an entire town here, let's connect with that, and that's how we connected with the audience. There's lots of nuances of that Leave Nothing But Memories campaign, but there's a very strong brand identity to it, and there's a very strong story that the audience connects with. So I would encourage people to think about, when it comes to their particular story, event, audience, of like how do you talk to them in a different way? If it was called, musicians have a green policy, I don't think we'd get to where we are, Or if I was just like, I just don't think it would have the punch that you need. And it doesn't always have to be a punch, it can be a hug. That like Leave Nothing But Memories is a hug. We had 2 people have it tattooed on their arm this year, which was mental. So if you're talking about measurable things, how many people get a tattoo with your sustainability campaign is one. But I guess and also choosing a couple of main things to talk about with your audience. For us, the first year at Kendal, we did about 50 different initiatives across the festival, but the big campaign was Take Your Tent Home. In year 2, it was like Take Your Tent Home and Return Your Cup. And it's just building on it as well. So just like pick your battles, don't try and do everything, just try and do a few things really well in a way that your audience gets.
I think we might just have time for one more, if there is one last question. Anybody wants the last question?
While we wait for a question, can I build on what you were all saying?
Yeah, you can go then.
It's also like, remember, not every channel is appropriate for complexity. So have different aspects of your message that is appropriate to the channel. Don't try to make Instagram great for nuance. It never will be. Just get the conversation started on that channel and invite people in for more nuanced conversations on other platforms that are more appropriate for that, or at the actual event.
And I think I'll probably end it with the favourite phrase that we use every day at Music Declares Emergency, which is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Doing something is better than doing nothing, and not everything you do will work. But I would suggest doing something is at least a step forward. I'd like to thank everyone on the panel and you for bearing with the rain and listening to us. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you all for your contributions.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you.